right, now we are on to our different ideas about the origins of life. So, there are lots of different things that this um, was looked at, and lots of different people tried to figure out the answer to this question. But one of the oldest ideas about the origin of life was this idea called spontaneous generation. So the idea that life arises from non-life, and this was a very widely accepted theory for a really, really long time until we have this Italian guy. His name's Francisco Redi. It was his experiment was one of the ones that kind of disproved this idea, but along with several others. So the meat experiment, as it is called, he wanted to know if this spontaneous generation idea was true. So the idea was to see if meat produced maggots. So he did it in several different situations. So he had three different independent variables that he tested here. So he had three pieces of meat, three different flasks with three different openings or closing. So an unsealed flask, a corked flask, and then one that had gauze over the top. So the sealed flask never produced any type of fly larva, which kind of helped prove the point that the fly larva wasn't just inherently in the meat. Something else had to put it there. So, in the flask that was completely unsealed, had the larva come up because obviously flies dropped in there and laid their eggs. Flies lay their eggs in areas where the larva will have a ready food source. And then in the flask covered with gauze, the maggots appeared, the larva appeared on the top of the gauze. So this helped to rethink the idea of spontaneous generation, and it was disregarded in favor of something else. But it actually wasn't even fully rejected until the mid 1800s. And then the new theory came out, and the theory is called the theory of biogenesis, which basically states that only living organisms can produce other living organisms. And this is still a theory that they talk about today, which, if you think about just our base knowledge of how science has changed in the last 200-300 years, it seems some of it seems kind of ridiculous, but without adequate experimentation, people didn't come up with these ideas until a little bit later. Now, as far as modern ideas go, there's a lot of agreement among biologists and different sciences that there were a series of chemical reactions early in Earth's history, and during these events, organic molecules were generated from simpler ones, and then just over time, they started to create life. But cellular evolution, for a long period of time, scientists didn't know what the earliest cells looked like, because how would you even begin to find fossil evidence of cells? You can't even see them without the aid of a microscope, so would you just look at every single rock you found, hoping that you find fossilized cells? Well, that actually was pretty true for the most part. But then in 2004, scientists announced the discovery of what appeared to be fossilized microbes in volcanic rock that was roughly 3.5 billion years ago, or years old. And that turned the scientific community upside down, because they finally had an answer about what some of the earliest microscopic organisms looked like. So there were tons of theories about the first cells being, were they prokaryotic, so were they like bacteria, were they like this kind of bacteria, were they kind of like that. But in general, the accepted idea is that they were prokaryotic. They were very, very simple. They didn't have a nucleus. They had very, very few organelles. And then one of the big theories that came out of this, and I like to talk about it because it was proposed by a woman in the 60s, which at that point women in science it wasn't really a popular idea, but it is still a theory that is talked about, and it's actually something that I talk about a lot in my college biology class. So basically, it states that the ancestors of eukaryotic cells lived in association with prokaryotic cells. So they were kind of found side by side for a long period of time. So this was suggested by a biologist named Lynn Margulis And like I said, in the 60s, women in science was not a big idea. And a lot of women weren't given the credit that they deserved for their discoveries and their theories until much later. It's not the way it is today. And we see all kinds of scientific advancements being made by women. But like I said, it is something I like to discuss. I like to be sure that you guys are aware that of the history of females in science. But this is actually the end of the video today. It's really short. You do have another assignment, and it is a two-part assignment. So be sure that you give yourself plenty of time to get this finished. But this will be the end for today. Have a good evening.